This is Redirect, Immigration Law and Perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, that's like what we do, right?
It's the podcast.
Yeah.
And we've got some colleagues now who are trying to, I feel like they're trying to encroach on our corner.
I know. I hear that. It's like, oh, I have this podcast. I'm like, well.
What are you talking about? We have the podcast.
What are you going to do about gardening? I mean, that's fine.
Right.
And do a podcast about Legos, about.
Sure.
If you want to jump into like Star Wars, I mean, I know you're big into Star Wars, but you don't do a podcast about that. So I feel there's an opening for people.
Right. Lots of openings. It's going to be Knives Out at the next AILA conference. That's all I know.
Yeah, it's probably going to be virtual, but you know.
Well, right. The next time it's safe to congregate, it's going to be switchblades and whatever else we carry. So no, look, Matthew and I, a couple of immigration lawyers, we like to get together roughly once a week, although lately I don't know, I think we have podcast fatigue after the Trump years. And so it's been a little less regular. But Matthew, how are you doing?
Well, it is strange. I'm going to have to say the last couple of weeks, I've emailed government attorneys and they've responded in a positive manner. I asked one, I emailed about to get some notices to appear for upcoming case of mine, and they just emailed them to me.
That's a charging document. It's sort of the document that gets things off the ground. And I've had trial attorneys complain about having to provide those, my entire career. So the fact that you got one is pretty impressive, actually.
Yeah, and I actually just did it to like create a record so I can tell the judge, hey, I've been trying to get this, but
you were fully expecting to not get that's hilarious.
Then I've been trying to get this one guy out of detention since I think December. First I tried on COVID, then on the priority memos and the guidance and all that stuff. And I think I asked 4 or 5 times and they always said no. I sent it, there's a new email, ICE case review. I sent it on Wednesday. This morning I got a response from his deportation officer saying he's going to be released today. Nice. So then I sent a couple of emails to the local USCIS office, responded right away.
Wow,
it is like, I don't know. I mean, it's sunny here. It's like 70 degrees out. It's beautiful. I don't know. It's a really new day. Weird.
Well, I was going to talk about a dead client. So I feel like...
Yeah, like now you just have to bring everything down.
This is just weird because you're normally the one that brings that dark energy.
Yeah, Steve was my client, they're really inspiration. I'm like, yeah.
And they're probably going to get deported anyways.
My clients have cancer, blah, blah. Okay, well, I'm sorry. But so I'm very sad to hear about your client. Is it a recent death or?
Well, first of all, we can tie up what you were saying. That's great that you've had. This is a true role reversal of a show because that's great that you've had some positive experiences recently. But my experience has been really kind of weird with ICE counsel as of late. So, Biden on day one signs this executive order changing the enforcement priorities for immigration and customs enforcement. And here we are, it's March. We're coming up on the 2-month anniversary of his presidency. And so far, in immigration court at least, the immigration prosecuting attorneys have no real idea what they're supposed to be doing. And so I don't know if you've been getting these weird sort of like vague guidelines from them. They're not even guidelines. It's sort of vague insinuation that maybe we should be filing motions to continue. Have you heard about this?
I mean, I've heard it on Twitter. The trial attorneys I've been dealing with. So again, this is something else happened today. They've been telling me, well, we can't stipulate to that. We can't, come to an agreement on this or that. And really trying to act like nothing has happened. But just today, I emailed the trial attorney about perhaps withdrawing an appeal where the judge had granted asylum. And I was kind of expecting to get a LOL no. Mm-hmm. But he emailed me back and he's like, well, just so you know, the reason I appealed is I really didn't think he was worthy of a grant. However, I mean, I understand your request, and I really can't make that decision. If you can send it back in a more formal manner, I'll bring it up to my supervisors. So, right, I mean,
that's something.
This Philadelphia office for a colleague of mine actually withdrew an appeal in a similar situation. So the tide is turning, I believe. So I'm kind of optimistic.
I'm still confident that they will get some sort of guidance, but I had a hearing the other day, good case. And again, the trial attorney insisted that he couldn't stipulate, not because off the record he thought it was a bad case or that we hadn't met our burden. He basically admitted off the record, yeah, it's a pretty good case. And I feel like it's, on the path towards getting where you need to go. But his position was, we're just not allowed to agree to anything still.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that.
And he's the same trial attorney who had called me a few weeks before to say, well, maybe you need to file one of these motions to continue. And our position is that we won't respond to them. And that the judge, if they want to continue the case based on ICE's enforcement priorities, that would be up to the judge. And it's just a weird dynamic where they're trying to place the onus on us to sort of carry out their enforcement priorities while their position continues to be, we have to pretend to be fighting everything, even when you've clearly met your burden. And yeah, so it's frustrating. I don't think it'll be 4 years of this. I think there will be some memo coming down the line saying, all right, guys, like this is the deal. But it is just really frustrating.
Well, we should quickly mention as we're on the Kumbaya. Kumbaya, whatever. On the feel good portion, the I-944 is dead, and that's affidavit of self-sufficiency that was kind of a new requirement for people who were going to adjust status, which was really tedious and really burdensome, and really would knock a lot of people out. From a practice standpoint, we're kind of probably all immigration lawyers who do this type of work are really giddy just because it was so much work. Had to get credit reports, bank statements. It's just dumb. And then also, we can no longer do motions to reopen sua sponte, but now we can. That's back for us. And a motion to reopen sua sponte is when we kind of ask the judge to kind of overlook all these other, statutory reasons why the case should be reopened and just kind of reopen it. And lots of times we do it. For example, if someone has new relief available to them, maybe now they're eligible to adjust status, but they've been ordered removed in the past. And so the really only thing available was to do what they call a sua sponte motion. And the Trump administration did away with that. And it was really hard because when you start looking at the motions to reopen that we do, so many of them are in that vein. So that's back. So, I mean, this week it's been pretty good. I had a cancellation of removal hearing where the trial attorney was awful. I think it's going to get granted. We'll talk about that on another day, about how the system is still really kind of designed to gatekeep white supremacy, and how things like driving in order to go to work to support your family is considered a negative. Buying a house to house your family, if you do it while you're in removal proceedings, is viewed as a negative. It's just crazy, the arguments that ICE comes up with. But we can talk about that on another day, because I kind of feel good. I want my good feeling to go on for a little bit longer. So, Stephen, make me feel bad.
Well, I do want to say I had a cancellation hearing 2 days ago, I believe, Wednesday, and we won. And we won at a point of the hearing where, again, the prosecutor refused to stipulate, again, not because he thought I'm not convinced of the facts, but just because we're not allowed to. So we have to go through the motions and ask this person who's lived here virtually their whole life, how will you and your children suffer if you're deported? And it really struck me. I've had this feeling recently about green card interviews too. The whole experience struck me as being sort of like, a performative humiliation of immigrants. And once we feel like you've sort of bent the knee and been sufficiently humiliated and traumatized by this whole process, then maybe we'll consider blessing you with our benefits, which are basically you get to stay, right? And so, it's one of those things where you're happy that you won, but you can also see the wear and tear on your client's psyche and on their family. This is a person who's been in removal proceedings for 7 years. She hasn't caused any delay in the process whatsoever. And so even when we win, it kind of sucks a lot of time.
I mean, good for you and your client. And I had a similar thing with the client I'm just talking about, who has been here for 20, he came when he was 16 or 17. He's been here more than half his life, 20 years, 21 years. He owns a home. He runs his own business. He just opened up a restaurant in December, which I think takes a lot of courage. His wife runs her own restaurant, a Mexican restaurant. His restaurant's an Italian restaurant. He's worked hard his entire time that he's been here. And before the hearing, he said, am I going to be able to apologize to the judge for coming here illegally? And I said, listen, you can say what you want to say, but I think that the judge should thank you. And we should be thanking you as a country for the hard work that you've put in and for raising 4 wonderful children, having them part of our community. He lives in my community. He lives in my town. His kids go to school where my kids go to school. And I'm saying, we should be thanking you. You shouldn't have to apologize for anything.
Right.
He kind of laughed and we didn't talk about it much. And at the end of my questioning of him, I always ask him, like, is there anything else you want to say? Because this kind of gives them, lets them say what they want to say. And he said, no, I'm good. And so he didn't throw himself on, I'm so sorry for this and sorry for that. And I thought that was, I was glad
we should be clear, because somebody tried to call me out for this on Twitter this week. We're not trying to engage in like a ranking of immigrants or suggesting that like they need to meet our threshold of goodness in order to stay or deserve humanity. Matthew and I have represented plenty of people who don't own restaurants, who maybe aren't super hard workers, who have gotten in trouble. We have lots of clients like that, and they also deserve, basic humanity, and they deserve to be treated like the people that they are. We're not trying to lean into those tropes as we've been accused of doing.
But we'll also, I don't think we'll apologize for when we're representing people who have hired us in order to be able to stay here with their family, for highlighting those things for the system.
Yeah. My client, for example, had, she works in the fields and she worked through the pandemic. And the point of my tweets the other day were just to point out that, like you said, the hearing should have been 2 minutes. You worked through the pandemic. You helped feed this country at our time of need. Here's your green card. Thank you, ma'am, for your service to this country. And instead, it was this punitive, sort of humiliating experience and very traumatizing. The experience of not just being in removal proceedings, but also preparing for a final hearing where your attorney is going over and over these questions and making sure that you've really thought about what you're going to do if you're deported and where you're going to go and how your kids are going to be affected. All of that is just so unnecessary. I mean, it's necessary under the law, unfortunately, but it shouldn't be this way.
Yeah. So it's not the best process, but it's what we have to work through right now.
Right. All right. So I wanted to share this story, and then we're going to have Taylor Levy, right? Levy?
Yeah.
Levy. I'm probably saying it wrong. I should let you say it.
Well, I'm not going to be able to be on with that interview, so I'll let you butcher it.
We got to figure out what the hell's going on at the border.
Exactly. And the way we run our interviews is that if we don't know something, which is most of the time, we have an expert on that can explain it.
Mm-hmm.
And now some interviewers would like to do like a lot of research beforehand in order to really understand what's going on. We feel, we bring on experts so they can explain it. So I'm not going to be on for the interview. If I was, it would go something like this. Hey, Taylor, the border, what's up with that? And then she would talk for about half an hour and explain everything on the border. And then Stephen would say, hey, thanks for coming on.
What's the deal with the border? Yeah.
Yeah. And that would be the show. So that's going to come up right after this.
Right. Yeah. That's pretty much how it goes.
Because we have no idea, right? I mean, we spend our days texting each other and others saying, what's going on? And it's hard to know.
Well, I was going to say, I actually know all the answers. I just play dumb because of our dumb audience.
Yeah, it's just me. It's me.
That's just you. Well, I wanted to share a quick story, and it's really been in my head for the last couple of weeks because I think that being in the system as we are so often can really warp our perception of what is real and what is acceptable and what is okay. And so I have a client. She's a friend. She's a little bit older than me. She's actually really old, like you, Matthew, just old and dusty.
Wow.
That's not true, but she's older than me. Anyhow, so she fell in love with this person who she actually had known for a really long time from back in the day. And they rekindled their love and started the process of bringing this person from his native country. And she was able to visit. He was not able to come here because he couldn't get a tourist visa because, tourist visas are hard to get. And so we started the process of getting him his immigrant visa. And we felt really lucky because we were able to get the case expedited because my friend had some health issues late in 2020. And so we filed an expedite request with the consulate and got him an emergency interview just a few weeks ago. And this was like a great success that it was taking just over a year to get somebody to this country, right? So this is immigration lawyer brain going, wow, look at what a great job we did.
Yeah, good job, Steve.
Just over a year. Wow. Amazing. And so the client went down, they went to their appointments at the consulate, and they celebrated when his case was approved, and he passed on the way to the US as a permanent resident. He didn't even get the chance to land here. And it got me thinking about, on the one hand, they were lucky to have spent those last moments together when so many people don't get that chance, but also just how warped our brains have become to expect as normal or as exceptional a process where you can bring a loved one, but only after years of slow and expensive processing. And it really highlighted to me, I think, the importance. We talk about open borders and like whether or not that's useful in terms of politically, is that language useful? But really what open borders to me ultimately means is family unity and finding ways to get people together with their loved ones as much as possible and as quickly as possible. So.
Well, yeah. That's tragic, and my condolences for you and your friend. But, one thing people should know is this isn't we don't really have a choice. There's a process. not too long ago, well, maybe too long ago, 20 years or so, me and my wife were married in Peru. We filed our application at the embassy. We had an interview a week later, and her visa was ready a few days after that. And that was it. Right. And so it doesn't, like, these long adjudication times, the only purpose they serve is to gatekeep, So Stephen's saying his client, he got, especially with the pandemic, got him on track to be here fast. When it really should have been, oh, wait, these people are married? Oh, okay. Process and come over.
Right. And I don't know if
it doesn't take long. Like, background checks do not take long.
They don't take long. I don't know if you've seen those. I don't know where I heard this, but some sort of CLE where USCIS can adjudicate an I-130. That's a family petition in under 20 minutes, I think. It's,
in the olden days, people would bring their applications to the field office and they would pay for them there, drop them off there, and they would have the interviews on the same day.
Right. Yeah. So it's, when we're talking about open borders or more open borders or family unity or whatever you want to call it, we're not even necessarily calling for some sort of utopian fantasy. A lot of this is just like a return to the sanity that used to exist, because in this one case, it's time that you never get back. And hopefully when other people wait through this process, they're able to have many long years together. But unfortunately, these are tragedies that happen when we don't care to fund the system, or we're fine with the system not working. And yeah, it's hard for me. I don't know, maybe I've mentioned this already on the show, but on the one hand, we're in a country that says, oh, there's people at the border and we just don't have the space and it's really complex. And I agree that it's complex, the situation, but we're driving an RC car on Mars and it's like picking up dirt off of another planet and it's going to bring it back here. Like, we are capable of
a lot of it is really not that complex.
Well, yeah.
I mean, for a lot, like your client, right? That's not a complex case.
Right.
I mean, it doesn't take long to run background checks and, okay, this person, get him a little visa to get here. That's not complex. What's going on the border with unaccompanied minors and all that and having to match them up, sure, there's a little bit more complexity there. I would also dare say that they're making it too complex.
Right. That's true, too.
There is a reporter here in Philadelphia who had called me up the other day and said, I'm doing a story on this woman I think she had a daughter who was 21 and a son who was 16 or 17 who had just crossed over. And the next day they called her and said, send plane tickets and we'll send your children to Philadelphia. And he's like, is this normal? And I'm like, well, it's happened before. It's not abnormal. But see, that wasn't hard. That wasn't complex. Okay, who are you? Okay, where's your mom? Oh, she's in Philadelphia. What's her phone number? Call her, send plane tickets, and we'll send the kids. Mm-hmm. And I think it took 2 days.
Right.
Some things are not that complex. And that's what scares me about January 6th. Talk about even more security and more regulations and laws and all that. And those things are not necessarily going to affect the white angry male, right? Even though you think January 6th would. I do think we need to step back, kind of simplify things. And I think that will go a long way.
Yeah.
So I think up next, you're going to talk to Taylor.
That's right.
And she's wonderful. She's a warrior on the border. And unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to participate, but I'm going to listen.
A border warrior?
A border warrior, yeah.
Well, the impetus for this interview is that my mom, friend of the show, my mom.
Yes.
So my mom called the other day, and my mom adamantly anti-Trump and very sympathetic to the work that I do. Her sister, who does not feel that way, told her that there's now 60,000 people a day pouring across the border, totally unimpeded, as if Border Patrol had just rolled out a red carpet. And this is Biden's America, right? These are the open borders that he's been talking about.
Sounds awesome.
And I told my mom, I am pretty sure that's not true. But we'll have to find out. So this show goes out to my aunt.
Does she listen?
No, but maybe I'll
shout out to her.
Shout out to my aunt.
And I'm sure she's a good aunt. So
what we should do is tease this part of the show, and then we should paywall the interview. And then I'll send her the link. I'm not smart enough to know even how to do that. So otherwise. All right.
Well, Stephen, I'm very sad to hear about your client. So my condolences to you and your friend. And I'm going to enjoy the conversation you have with Taylor. Tell her I said hi.
All right. Thanks, Matthew.
See ya.
It's pronounced Levy or Levy?
Levy. Leave me alone.
Okay. Taylor Levy.
Yep.
Listen, here's the deal. My mom, who's a huge fan of the show, called me the other day because her sister informed her that there's currently 60,000 illegals per day just walking across the border, totally unimpeded. They're just allowed to just walk right in. And shouldn't we all be super scared? And I thought, that doesn't seem like that's very true.
Yeah, it's not. It is not true.
And at the same time, we're seeing lots of stuff on the news about, there's more and more kids and families and people being detained. So what is the deal? What's going on at the border?
I mean, we're definitely seeing, a challenge on the border. I think that that's true. But it has to do with all of the policies left in place by Trump and Stephen Miller and his cronies. It has to do with the bottleneck that exists because we have people who have been trying to cross the border, trying to seek asylum and exercise their very legal rights to seek asylum, incredibly impeded since the entirety of the Trump administration, but especially in the last couple of years. And then everything was just shut down from March 20th, 2020 onwards because of COVID. And it's virtually impossible for anyone to seek asylum. And so the change that happened is Title 42 is still in place. And Title 42 is the policy, that says no one's allowed to seek asylum. We're just going to send you back to Mexico and send you back to Mexico. But the diplomatic agreements are such that you can only send 3 countries back to Mexico, or 4 countries if you include Mexicans. So you can send back Mexicans, Guatemalans, Hondurans, and Salvadorans. So then anyone else from any other countries who come in, you'd have to put them on a plane to expel them. And that's why we're seeing them prioritizing these planes to Haiti, even though the country is absolutely in crisis. And, it's horrible. I heard today about a baby that was only 2 days old being put on a plane to Haiti, in the midst of a coup, essentially, that's going on there. And it's horrible. It's just absolutely horrible. And so while we're seeing more family units being released, and we are seeing some families being released, allowed to seek asylum, as has always been, people are allowed to seek asylum. That is a big part of the history of our entire country throughout, the history of the United States. And we're continuing to see that. The numbers are still relatively small. And the main reason why the numbers are so high for unaccompanied minors is because since Central American family units cannot be processed as a family and kept together, people are making these horrible, horrible decisions to send their kids alone across.
Right. So, my aunt, shout out to my aunt, is probably somebody who in the last few years has said things like people should do it the right way. I'm not against immigration. I'm just against illegal immigration, and people should do it the right way. And she's probably also said something about law and order, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like my dad. Yeah, they beat the trends. They should have a beer.
They're probably, she doesn't drink beer, but I'm sure they'd be very tight. you're pointing out something important, which is the process of seeking asylum is both law and order. The law says that this is a process that people should apply this way or can apply this way. And it's also a version of doing it the right way, the thing that we're constantly pretending we care about, right? But in terms of like the Trump roadblocks and the things that are in place, talk a little bit about MPP for people who maybe haven't been following that story.
Yeah, so MPP is like the worst name ever. It's Migrant Protection Protocols. There was zero protection whatsoever. It's what we usually call Remain in Mexico, because that's what they called it at the beginning. And
it was named on opposite day, I think.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Because it was originally leaked as Remain in Mexico, but then the official rollout was the opposite day.
Yeah.
Because it's not protection, it's persecution. I saw a news article that just came out that the Mexican government had claimed they would help get people jobs, and instead only 64 people ever got jobs of the 70,000 who were returned through the official system. And it was just, people are dumped on the streets of Mexico, literally just taken to the streets of Mexico and told, come back for a court date in 3 to 4 months. Good luck. And that's what the Migrant Protection Protocols were.
And this was in lieu of allowing people into the United States to relocate with family most of the time so that they could have their cases processed in the United States.
Exactly, which, they used to be able to come in, be given an ankle bracelet, which they call alternatives to detention, GPS monitoring, cell phone GPS monitoring, ankle monitoring if you need to, go in people's house, case management, and we see time and time again. I know what my dad would always say, same thing for perhaps your aunt, is, well, no one shows up for court anyway, which is just like not true. It's just statistically not at all true. People are going to courts. People do want to seek asylum. They don't want to remain undocumented in the United States. They want to be able to get their papers and stay. And so instead, we just dumped them on the streets in Mexico and said...
Well, actually, before MPP, didn't Trump dismantle this program that Obama had put in place to sort of facilitate people going to their hearings, right?
Oh, exactly. Yeah, there was like the family case management program, which had like a 99% appearance rate if people were enrolled in this family unit case management program. I think that's what it was called. 99% appearance rate. People want to go to the court. They want to understand what's happening. They don't want to remain undocumented for the rest of their lives. And I mean, a lot of the asylum seekers in MPP, a lot of them are Cubans and Venezuelans. And they're Venezuelans who have waited for the last 2 years for their court hearing in Mexico, because then courts were canceled for a year because of COVID. So they've been waiting for the last 18 months, 2 years. And had they just actually snuck into the country and been on U.S. soil, they would have just qualified for TPS announcement. And so a lot of them are really, really upset because they were waiting their turn and doing everything exactly the right way. A lot of them are people who went to the bridge and said, help me, help me. I'm a Venezuelan political dissident. I'm a Nicaraguan political dissident. I'm a Cuban political dissident. And then they were just dumped on the streets of Mexico, where they're kidnapped, where they're raped, where they're tortured, and now they weren't even on U.S. soil for the TPS announcement. And so they feel dumb for trying to do things the right way.
Right. MPP gets put in place, and it seems like there's sort of two goals for the administration in doing that. One is to just not let people in, but the other is to make things objectively terrible for asylum seekers to send a message, right?
Exactly. It's deterrence again. But what we know is 2018 was family separation. That was probably one of the worst things you could ever do to anyone, steal their children, hide their children, everything we know. And then 2019 had the biggest 1 year shift, in increased crossings. They tried to do this deterrence. They tried to show, look, we're going to torture you to the absolute maximum. But people are so desperate that they're going to keep trying, and they're going to keep trying. And that's what we see right now, because they are doing everything possible to save their children's lives, to save their own lives. And when they're facing certain death back home versus a chance at life here, they're going to keep trying. And we know this. And there's a way for us to treat people with dignity and humanity and welcome them and treat this as a logistical challenge as opposed to some dramatic crisis, that's just blown out of proportion completely and totally compared to 50,000 people cross the border lawfully every day prior to COVID in El Paso alone. So in one city, my city doesn't even have a law school. It's so small. and 50,000 people per day cross lawfully in my city. I mean, that was before COVID, so now it's fewer because the border is hard to cross for people with visas. But I cross the border every single day. I don't get a COVID test when I cross. You know, I have a whole album on my phone entitled CBP Agents with No Masks because a lot of them are anti-maskers. And even though they're supposed to wear masks, they all have their mask around their chins. And now, you know, at the same time, the Abbott, for example, in Texas is going to say, okay, we're 100% open, no mask mandate, blah, blah, blah. He's going to try and claim that migrants are the ones bringing the COVID when the positivity rate is like half that of the overall population in positivity rates. It's just, everything's ridiculous and racist. And it's the same racism we've seen year after year in immigration.
Right. What kind of progress is there in terms of getting things back to the way they were pre-Trump in terms of is it Title 42? That's what it's
Title
called,
42,
right?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of hope,
and
but it's not good enough.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, that's the question. Like, what needs to be done at this point?
I mean, there has to be fair and equal processing for all nationalities based upon level of fear, as opposed to really what we're seeing is disparate treatment of Central Americans and of Haitians versus, for example, there's a pretty decent sized uptick right now of Russian asylum seekers crossing in the Tijuana area. And they're getting in just fine. They're getting released with ankle bracelets just fine. They're white and blonde. And I believe that they are real asylum seekers also. But do I believe that it is at all reasonable that they're getting a chance to seek asylum while Haitians are being, you know, loaded up with 2-day-old babies and on planes to be immediately expelled? No. Like, so we need a process.
Why wouldn't the Russians be subject to Title 42?
Because fewer of them are crossing, so we don't put a plane together. So they are released every single day. Russians are released and allowed to seek asylum. And Romanians and Indians and Brazilians, because there's more Haitians crossing, so it's easier for us to put together a plane to Haiti. Also, Haiti is not requiring COVID tests prior to accepting a plane, while a lot of the countries are requiring COVID tests before agreeing to accept a plane. So we decide to send a message, and that message is inherently racist and structurally racist and disproportionately affected because a lot of the Central Americans have, you know, very real asylum cases, but the people who we're seeing, you know, able to get through the border right now are, you know, are not from Central American countries or Haiti for the most part, with some exceptions. You know, we have been seeing some Central Americans getting through as long as their children are under the age of 6, but it's not all of them. So like yesterday, for example, what the administration chose to do because of Title 42, because of the Title 42 policy, is family units who were detained in South Texas because there wasn't enough processing capacity or whatever. I don't know why. I don't know why they did it, but they crossed, undocumented Central Americans crossed seeking asylum in South Texas. They were apprehended by Border Patrol, turned themselves in. They bussed them to an airport. They loaded them up on a plane. They flew that plane to El Paso, Texas, and then they marched them over the bridge and dumped them on the streets of Juarez. And this was 75 people, including little bitty babies, kids, and, you know, toddlers. And so those moms and dads and small children, mostly moms, you know, are all of a sudden on the streets of a different border city, like hours and hours away from where they were before. So they have no contacts. They have nowhere to go. And we did that presumably for deterrence. I don't know why else we would have done that, you know, because let's see how miserable can we possibly make people. But all that means is what we know happens is those families are instantly kidnapped in a lot of cases. I don't know about these specific 75, but we know over and over again when people are sent back to Mexico under Title 42 or under MPP, it is instant kidnapping. You know, Doctors Without Borders just put out like a crazy report of, I think 75% of their patients report having been kidnapped in Mexico, of their migrant patients returned in Tamaulipas. So it's like, we did that yesterday. And then, Trump's not our president right now. And this is what we as a country did yesterday. And, you know, I had a friend personally witness the 75 get returned, completely confused, completely having no clue where they are.
You've been hearing some of this idea that DHS is somehow a rogue agency, that they can't be reined in. But it seems like, at least in dealing with ICE chief counsel, it seems like they just still lack specific guidance. Is that your experience, you think, with Border Patrol, or do you think it's really just something that can't be reined in?
I mean, I think you're comparing apples and oranges. I think, yeah, an ICE attorney sitting in an office, I think they are lacking guidance. I think there's that issue. But the difference between Border Patrol is Border Patrol has always been a rogue agency, because they're a bunch of like, let's go catch illegals, angry people, you know, on ATVs and horses and in the desert. I mean, that's who it self-selects for. Like, my biggest joke, living in a border city, I mean, in a border city, huge amounts of our population work for the federal government. So it's like, if you're on a dating app or something, you're going to see a bunch of ICE agents and Border Patrol agents. So I always talk about there's green shirts versus blue shirts. And blue shirts are the guys who are at the bridge. They're checking your passport. They don't really care. They're the customs agents. Those dudes, I mean, they're not my favorite. Like, we're not on the same political spectrum, but like, you know, they just wanted a good job. But the green shirts, you like can't even be friends with the green shirts. The green shirts are the guys who, you know, it's 95% men. They want to go run around and play angry cop man in the desert and like search for illegals. And that's exactly how they act. And they are completely rogue, and there is insufficient monitoring of them. And this has always been true. And we have story after story after story of, even with Title 42, you're supposed to fingerprint them and take their pictures. And sometimes the Border Patrol agents don't want to do that because they don't have the machine, or the machine's down, or they don't want to drive them to the station. So they literally just like take them to the river, put their hands on their gun and say, walk back over across, or else. I had that happen to pregnant women. We had that happen to people who fell off the wall, who they then like carried them with their broken legs and then just dumped them on the other side of the border. These are all like known cases of things that happen. Like, Border Patrol is a rogue agency, completely and totally. And so it's like DHS in general, I mean, there's pockets, you know, but Border Patrol is completely out of control. And we've known this for years. We've known this since 1924. We've known this.
Right. So if you had a chance to talk to somebody like your father or my aunt, who is now hopped up on Fox News and is really, really worried about Dr. Seuss and Biden's border crisis, what would your final message be to somebody like that?
The numbers are still tiny, relatively, when we look at things based upon the U.S. population, the, you know, influxes in the past, et cetera. Title 42 in particular includes huge amounts of recidivism, like of people crossing over and over again. Like, I think 25% right now of the apprehension numbers for people who have been caught more than once. And the reason why they're trying over and over again is because they're fleeing danger. It is the same thing you would do for your children. And I mean, when I do bring up my dad, he's really conservative on this stuff, but he loves me and he's a good dad. And every time I bring him a specific story and I tell him a specific horrible thing that happened in a specific case about, you know, a specific person, he always comes around to, well, not them. They're not one of the bad ones. They're not one of the ones who we should, you know, get rid of. They're not the MS-13 scary tattoo faces, which that's a whole nother other thing, because they also deserve safety and protection. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about little kids who are getting dumped on the street at 5 a.m. with muddy, wet pants and filled diapers and no food in the cold 40-degree temperature. That's what we're talking about. And that's not who we are. That's just like not who we are as people, even the conservatives. That's not what my dad wants. That's not what most of the Fox News people I know want. They just don't recognize that we're talking about children and families. And yes, single men also, who also have a legal right. But the numbers aren't, you know, this massive increase of scary single men trying to sneak in and steal your jobs and, you know, kick your kittens. That's not what's happening.
Right. Yeah, it's so important. I also wish more people would just maybe go read the State Department Human Rights Report or any other human rights report on some of these countries and try and empathize a little bit. It reminds me, like, I was thinking the other day, I wonder if people in Jordan, if they complain about Syrian refugees without understanding that there's a war going on in Syria. Because a lot of conservatives sound like that, like, oh, they're just coming here because they love our freedom and they love our jobs or whatever. But it would be really foolish to ignore the factors that are pushing people into your country, obviously. So I think people in Jordan are probably very aware of the war that's happening, I would hope. And hopefully most of them take that into consideration. And I wish that more people here would do the same when it comes to, whether it's Haitians or, even the Russians that you mentioned, even the Russians. That's how sympathetic I am.
I mean, I'm sympathetic to the Russians too. I'm not trying to say they don't deserve a chance, but I'm just saying that it's so unequal. We know it's so unequal. We know how many disparities there are here. And, what we're seeing is the poorest among us, the least among us, and the Black migrants are the ones who are getting extra screwed, per usual.
Right. Well, Taylor Levy, thank you so much. I know you're busy and you've got a big other phone call to do.
I do. I have some other calls.
I'm not allowed to mention. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on.
All right. Thanks so much.
Take care.